matters arising, there is only one, but it's not due for this board meeting, it's due for the next one. So there's no matters arising that aren't otherwise on the agenda. Has anybody got any other business they want to raise later on this meeting? No. So, we go straight to Mr. Hutchinson and Mr. Baird. So, welcome. You're going to talk to us about the experience of restoration and recovery.
Orthopedics here at Nobles. This is Kevin Baird, who is a consultant orthopedic surgeon who's been heading up the Synaptic side of the orthopedic restoration and recovery project. So to put it into some context, orthopedics was particularly hard hit, being essentially an elective inpatient-based specialty, first by COVID, and then from the recovery from that, we had great difficulty in establishing clean implant beds. So for us, with our joint replacements, we need clean wards. We can't have medical patients on the wards, so the cancellation rates were very high. So for approximately 2 years, we were severely compromised in what we were able to do. We did have access to day surgery, but we didn't have access to inpatient beds. So our waiting times for our predominantly joint replacement patients was rising quite significantly. That wasn't anything unusual. The whole of orthopedics in the UK is having exactly the same experience. I got involved in this project sometime in November of 2021 when we were looking at options, and it became clear that accessing UK healthcare was not going to be an option. The UK was trying to recover as well. So trying to actually offload patients to the UK was really not going to happen. So we began to look inwards as to how we could do the work on island. What we basically required was a ward. We required it to be ring-fenced, so it was open to our patients and only our patients. And we were looking at nursing staff because our additional nursing staff, we had lost numbers. They hadn't been doing the jobs that they were wanting to do. They were being spread across the organisation. And so actually staffing our wards was going to be a difficult issue. And we needed support for our therapy services. The Synaptic option became apparent. Synaptic were a company that had just completed a very innovative project up in Shetland where they'd actually brought orthopedic surgery to the island, and Kevin was integral in that project. And so we started out trying to establish first a ward, then supporting theatres, and through a huge organisational wide effort, I have to say, we were able to achieve that with a start in April. Now, as a surgeon, I tend to turn up and expect it all to happen for me. Actually being involved in this project has been a real eye-opener with the hard work that's been done across the organisation to make this happen, from porters to physios to pharmacy, to GDPR requirements for surgeons coming into the organisation, for the drive from the management side to actually get this done. So it's been a huge undertaking for the organisation. But we finally started in April of 2022, and the original project, or phase one of this project, was for Synaptic to provide us with a ward, which is the private patients unit, Ward 19. There was 15 beds on that, and the surgeons were us. So it was the Nobles 4 teams, and we cleared our diaries for that. So we were all here to work on this. The original plan was to try and do 48 joint replacements in those first 4 weeks. We managed 51. And the thing that was the major sort of learning point, I suppose, for us was our length of stay dropped quite dramatically. Before COVID, we were at about 4.5 days for an arthroplasty. It dropped to about 1.5 with the Synaptic support. And that was mainly due to the nursing levels, nursing staffing lengths and their therapy extended hours. So we were able to get these patients up on the day of surgery, and their length of stay is dramatically reduced, which we weren't necessarily expecting, but was a very welcome outcome for that. What that essentially did was open more beds for us. So with the 50 we had originally, we thought we could cope with 4 theatre teams working. The reality was our length of stay was nowhere near that. So we were able to open this up to a double-pronged parallel project, with our surgeons working in 4-week blocks alongside Synaptic surgeons for 2 weeks of those 4-week blocks. That enabled us to have a guaranteed number of patients coming through the project each week with the Synaptic surgeons and us working around them doing other things other than arthroplasty. I think we're on phase 6. We just finished phase 6 now. We started off with just over 500 joint replacements on our waiting lists with a length of stay in excess of up to 4 years. Now, they were outliers, that wasn't the average length of stay, but there were people out to 4 years. As of about now, we've done 270 joint replacements, and our length of stay for all 4 teams are now under 11 months. So we've managed to turn the arthroplasty waiting list around quite dramatically. If we concentrated only on arthroplasty, we would clear that waiting list by the middle of February on the current schedule. So that's what we've been able to achieve. We have not seen a noticeable increase in any complications or problems. There were some issues with concerns about wound management, but that appeared to be more of a communication problem. And really after the first phase, where we've been learning all the way along, we've really not seen a major increase in problems. So per sort of head of population, our current rates are probably more in excess of almost anyone in the UK and what we've been able to achieve. So we're down about 60% of our waiting list has gone in essentially 24 weeks of operating. So I'll hand you over to Kevin for his experience from the Synaptic side.
Thanks, James. Synaptic, which has allowed me to contribute to this project. I never forget, it's a great privilege to be entrusted with this work, and as a previously practicing busy surgeon who was mothballed due to COVID, it's been a great pleasure to rekindle that with, first of all, the project in Shetland and now in the Isle of Man. I'm on my 6th visit at the moment, and I total that I've been here for almost 90 days in total, so I've seen the island almost all its seasons, just winter to come. As of last Friday, as James mentioned, I worked out that the Synaptic surgeons alone have been responsible for just over 110 of the knee and hips that have been done, so just under half of the total. And so there'll be a bit of overlap here because we haven't collaborated, but the current model is that the elective orthopedic offering has been concentrated to 4 weeks out of every 5, and Synaptic has been supporting this with nursing teams in Ward 19 with a very high staffing ratio and excellent skill mix, and an operating theatre personnel as well for 4 weeks. And for 2 consecutive weeks, the Synaptic surgeon anaesthetist, so that's me, my equivalent, and anaesthetist participate. And the other 2 weeks, the local surgeons and local anaesthetists do the work. And for those 2 weeks, the Manx surgeons operate with the Synaptic theatre and ward teams. In a Synaptic week, typically we aim to do 3 joints per day for 5 days a week. So a typical fortnight for me is 30 hip or knee replacements. And I'm very lucky in that so far my cancellation rate has been 0. I shouldn't make myself hostage to fortune, but that's due to the hard work put in by the pre-admission staff so that there aren't any people listed who subsequently need to get cancelled. We do have some backups, some subs on the bench in case anybody does get cancelled. I haven't had to use them so far. And then after my spell of operating, I usually remain on the Isle of Man for a further 2 or 3 days, which is helpful in 2 ways. It allows me to see some more patients, to book the next lot of patients in for surgery and consent them, and also if anybody had concerns, a patient being discharged recently with a wound problem, I haven't immediately flown off and left it to these guys to sort out. So that's quite helpful as well. So I was thinking about what's made this possible, and again there'll be a bit of overlap here, and you can divide this into sort of people factors and infrastructure, physical factors. From the people point of view, I have to say the project has been extremely well supported by key noble staff. In no particular order, starting with James, who's led his team of 4 surgeons. They've been trawling through their waiting lists to provide us with appropriate patients for the enhanced recovery programme. So I have to say that not all the patients that you see are suitable for what we do, which is early discharge. There'll be some patients with multiple comorbidities, complex medical issues, maybe people who've been deconditioned over 2 or 3 years of waiting, who wouldn't go home necessarily in the period that we have. So they'll still be attended to by James and his colleagues. So we have to compare like with like to be fair. It's not easy as a surgeon to give up your patients, particularly someone you've known. You may have done one side in the past, and you're giving it to some stranger to do the second side, so they're very gracious about that. I next have to commend Tracy Hall and her team, pre-admission planning, absolutely superb in preparing these patients so meticulously and accurately so we can get to work with very little wasted time whatsoever. Two of the Manx care anaesthetists at least, I think, have been involved in vetting the patients as well to make sure they're physically fit from an anaesthetic point of view. And we've had Tracy Kelly setting up the ward so that we've got a very high throughput dedicated orthopedic unit, critically and crucially, as James said, with ring-fenced beds. No borders, no COVID, no norovirus, nothing like that. Obviously, the local professions associated, allied professions have stepped up as well. So you've got physio, OT staff, laboratories, secretaries, radiology, pharmacy even. They've all had to cope with an enormous increase in the throughput during this time. In theatres, the team leads assisted us with adjusting to their protocols and also with resupply, restocking of inventory, because we go through quite a lot of joint replacements in a week. And then the manufacturer, Stryker UK, have also been very helpful. Must mention yourselves as a board as well. It's quite a leap of faith to place your trust in me and colleagues from Scotland, crucially for committing funding the project. I hope we haven't let you down in that respect. And the final group of people to mention, I suppose, are the patients, who are the most important people in all of this. And they've accepted us enthusiastically. I've really enjoyed meeting with them, speaking to them, learning the history of the island and the geography. And the patients have done everything asked of them and been highly motivated to get home, usually as often as day one. The last 2-week block I did here, 86% of patients went home on the first day post-op. Those are the people factors. In terms of facilities, you've got a wonderful setup here. Your hospital is beautiful. It's modern, it's bright, spacious, it's airy, it's clean. It's a nice place to come to work as a neutral outsider, so that's a very good plus point. Greenfield site with mature trees. The ward environment has been excellent. We've been lucky to have these single rooms. I know that won't persist forever, but hopefully we can accommodate that when we move to the different premises. And finally, the theatre suites are excellent. They're well designed, they're well equipped, they've got natural light, which isn't always the case. You can see if it's raining or sunny outside. And the anaesthetists have commented that your facilities and your equipment from the anaesthetic point of view is also state-of-the-art. So it's probably one of the best and nicest theatres I've been privileged to work in. So that's all pretty positive, good news from my point of view. What happens now? Well, at the moment, I think we're looking forward to continuing our support with restoration and recovery of the elective surgical services more generally. The orthopedic and ophthalmology workflows are well established. General surgery will be coming on stream soon if it hasn't already, and I plan to work closely with James and also Alan Wilson to see how we can best alleviate the growing choke points in different aspects of the orthopedic service now that we seem to have cracked the pure hip and knee arthroplasty problem. And finally, looking ahead to the future, obviously it's very encouraging to see the numbers of hip and knee replacements tumbling down, but I'm well aware that the project as it stands in its current format is it's transient, it's expensive, and it's not sustainable indefinitely. So for my tuppence worth as an independent external observer, I think Synaptic's involvement will only be truly successful if we can help deliver a permanent change in philosophy, behaviours, attitudes, to the extent that the way we have been able to operate persists long after we've gone. So it'll be quite challenging to address. I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be attracting and retaining staff who will take things forward in our absence. And with that in mind, we've arranged interactions with the theatre and the ward teams so that we can kind of rub off each other and try and transfer some of that culture and philosophy. But it will require a lot of imagination and investment in recruitment and training to restore a dedicated elective orthopedic ward, which is what you really need, crucially with ring-fenced beds where staff morale, enthusiasm and their skills can develop and flourish. So that for me would be the ideal legacy for all of us. I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Cool. I'm aware from my previous employment that it's now the 60th anniversary of the first arthroplasty, and when they were first done, the length of stay was 34 days. So you've got it down to 1.5. And you mentioned about being selective about patients within that in order to achieve that. But when you say that the total waiting list has come down from 4 years to 11 months, that includes the ones that wouldn't have been suitable for the shorter length?
Yes, it does indeed. And in fact, phase one, if I'm honest, we were somewhat sceptical about the mix of them when it comes to the ASA grading, which is how sick these patients are. There was a surprising number of the ASA 3 more complicated ones. So the phase one is a very good representation of what we could achieve with our own team. And that was where we got the initial length of stay down to about 1.4 days. Personally, I did 10 knee replacements in that period. I had 9 go home on day 1 and 1 go home on day 2, and that included a number that I thought had no chance of doing that, if only to sort of stress test the idea. So that took us aback a little bit. We were a bit impressed. Well, we were more than a bit impressed about how that was happening. But by following the enhanced recovery protocols we put in place, and essentially with the extended hours and the staffing numbers, we were able to achieve that with what you would call a general Isle of Man population. So there is no doubt in my mind that if we can reproduce that model with homegrown talent, then we can achieve those kind of results on a routine basis.
How does, one of the biggest challenges for both outsourcing and insourcing is the governance bit of it. It's about people are getting, the waiting lists are getting down, but what about the complications though? Have you managed to keep an eye on the complications?
Increase of complications above, a national average. Speaking for myself, I had one late wound dehiscence, a lady who fell on her knee after she'd gone out, or just before she went home and presented while I was waiting on the platform at Haymarket Station to get my train up to Inverness. There was nothing I could do about her. That had happened that she'd come back in after I'd left, and one of James's colleagues kindly dealt with that. But I hear, and I phoned her subsequently, she's doing fine again. She had the wound resutured. So that's the one major complication that I know of. I'm not sure if you know any else.
We've been doing the follow-up ourselves, so albeit outside our normal arrangements. So the actual follow-up is being done by us. So in a way, we're policing the. Policing is probably too strong a word, but we're observing the synaptic outcomes, and we're not seeing a major problem. As you may or may not know, all our joints are entered into the National Joint Registry, and Kevin and his colleagues have signed up to that, so all of them are going into it. Now that's a longer term surveillance of the outcomes, so it's not within a short period of time, but we're not seeing an increase in 30-day returns. We probably have seen an increase in readmissions than where we were before, and I think that's a function of the enhanced recovery and people going home faster. So it's not for everybody, but of the readmissions, most of them have been for 24 hours, sort of hand-holding, reset the physio, adjust the painkillers, and then away again. We're not seeing a whole load of major problems. We've had 2 deep wound infections out of 270, which is pretty much what statistics would tell us we should have. So we're not seeing a major increase in that. And in fact, over the last 6 months, we've seen more wound infections from patients going across privately and coming back with infected joints than we're seeing from the numbers that we are. So our complication rates really are well within our expected regime, considering the number of joints that are actually going in.
One thing I was going to mention is that during the Shetland project, we had regular morbidity meetings with the infection control team. We did them remotely by teams because we were all, there's only one surgeon on the islands at any one time, and that's something that we could easily set up with James and his colleagues. So maybe monthly review what's happening, include the synaptic patients as well, so we know we're not missing anything.
Yeah. Oliver.
How are you monitoring concordance with rehab, effectiveness of rehab, and how do you think you will show that this is as good long-term as the previous way of doing it?
That comes from our National Joint Registry submissions. So basically they're all going into a national database, which is they are introducing and have done, I think for us, this will be the first year of PROMS data, so patient-related outcome measures. So essentially we're in line with the UK long-term surveillance standards. Now it's not going to tell you what happens in the first year, but if you say, well, how do these go over the next 5 years, however relevant that is, then it's going to be independently audited by the National Joint Registry.
Certain things you need in order to keep this sustainable. Are there any particular barriers to sustainability keeping us at manageable waiting lists without synaptic support, as synaptic move on to some of the other things?
It's all going to come down to ring fencing and orthopedic. Then orthopedics will stop. And that's been our experience pre-COVID, really from when Ward 20 was closed back in about 2015, and that was when we first began to see cancellations in orthopedics. Prior to that, I was here in 2010, or from 2010, and we never had cancellations. As the pressure on medical beds has gone up, then as soon as you get a medical patient onto an orthopedic ward, we have to shut down. So if you want an orthopedic service going forward that's going to be able to produce these kind of outcomes, which, as I say, with phase 1 we sort of proved we could do it on an all-comers basis, you need to ring fence that orthopedic bed, you need to ensure the staff remain stable. One of the luxuries we've had with Synaptic is they've had a very stable and quite senior set of nurses come, and that has really shone a light on just how good you can get a ward. And the feedback, I think, from patients and people who've interacted with it has been so positive. And you need to expand therapy, so we need more therapists later. So if we can get patients up on the day of surgery following the enhanced recovery sort of pathways, then we can really reduce this. But all it takes is one medical patient with vomiting or diarrhea, and you close the ward down. So that's the single biggest thing is to actually keep those beds for orthopedics. As we did pre-COVID, where we had all 12 and 16 beds, I think we proved quite clearly you could run the 4 teams off a ward with, say, 10 beds. So that may be a way of restructuring it with slightly fewer beds, but keeping them just for orthopedics is going to be the single most important thing. But it's the same across the UK. So I read in the BMJ today there's 7 million waiting for operations in England, of which a large proportion will be orthopedics. Orthopedics is terribly vulnerable to winter pressures and medical bed creep, and that's a very difficult problem to manage. They did try and get onto the Synaptic ward during our first phase, and because of the contractual obligations they weren't allowed to. I suppose you can't blame someone for trying. But it did require, no, sorry, there's a contract to actually stop it. So it's very difficult to protect them, but that essentially is what you need.
Dr. Reader wants to come in and start the same point.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very important question, Andy, because the restoration and recovery funding is only going to last for a certain amount of time and it's non-recurrent. And one of the key pieces of space, how we have the right level of support staff to be able to deliver on our commitments around our waiting list position. So there is work going on in the background. It's going to take a while to complete that, but it's part of that programme to look at what capacity we do need to create a sustainable waiting list position and give some clear commitments to the public about waiting times.
Yeah, just a couple of points to follow up on James, if I may, and I tried to work out why I feel that the Synaptic project works in terms of the personnel, and I think it's because the people who work in the nursing and surgical theatre teams don't have to come here, but they choose to come here because they want to. And many of them are very experienced in the NHS back home, but they see its inefficiencies, its failings, and they enjoy coming here because it allows them to do, it sounds a bit corny, what they were trained to do in an environment which fosters that. So they've got enough staff, they've got enough, it's the right skill mix. And another thing is the shifts are a little bit more imaginative. So you don't need a physio starting at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, because that's when the patients have their breakfast. What you need is a physio who can stay around until about maybe 6, 7 o'clock at night and catch the last patient who's come back from theatre, and also at the weekend and a Saturday in particular, so that the patients aren't just abandoned. So that's the other thing, is having the right people in the right positions. In a rugby club, you need a scrum half and a fullback in the right positions to make the team work.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much again, both of you, for coming along. This really is an excellent project. Some good questions to think about there about ring-fencing beds to keep this up. But it's good of you to come and explain it all to us. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank
Right, so the next item is the board assurance framework, and I'm pleased to see that it has been updated and that we're now able to have a deep dive, which we plan to do at each of the board meetings. One of these, and this one is into the financial stability. Teresa, you going to introduce this?
Yes, I'm going to introduce this and will be assisted ably by Sam and Nigel. But as you say, Bathurst 6 relates to our failure to achieve financial sustainability. And as you know, through the first year of operation, Manx had to go back for supplementary votes of just under £10 million. And indeed, at the start of the year, was predicting a similar level of overspend. So demonstrating what actions we are taking in order to achieve financial sustainability is incredibly important. Now, I will go into some detail about the gaps in assurance and try and provide some assurance on those of the work that's happening to address those gaps. But I think it's just worth noting that for this year, for 22-23, we have now approved a back to balance plan, which will take us back into balance. That is made up of some additional funding that we received from Treasury to fund our pay award. You will recall Manx Care received 2% in our baseline for the pay award, and we had to find the rest of that funding to offer the 4%. We have now received that funding, which does improve our position. We've also submitted business cases to draw down on some of the £6.5 million worth of reserve in the DHSC, around private patient income, which is in our baseline position, but we haven't been able to open our private patient unit because it's been used for restoration and recovery activity, funding for the TT and the Manx Grand Prix, and a number of high-cost placements for patients, which isn't necessarily predictable in our financial position. In addition, we have also identified an additional £3 million worth of cost improvement programmes working with Mersey Internal Audit to help us deliver that across the remainder of 22-23. So there is still a lot of work to do and to monitor this going through, but for 22-23 we have got a back to balance plan. So in terms of future financial sustainability, we are no way out of the woods, and I think 23-24 presents some real challenges that we need to respond to. So first and foremost, we do not have the financial settlement in draft that we were expecting. That is to be formally announced at a later stage, but it is less than what we were anticipating. We obviously will have a continued need to deliver CIP. We will need to respond to the requirements of the CQC, whatever recommendations they make that we will need to invest in. But on the counter side, and obviously we have got about £5.5 million worth of transformation schemes which have been funded non-recurrently by the transformation programme, but then needs to be reflected recurrently in the healthcare baseline. So there are some challenges for 23-24. That said, we are working very closely on that range of CIP opportunities, both in terms of short-term and long-term. We agreed yesterday that we will put in a 3-year financial planning strategy, which will give us some certainty. Over the course of the year, there has been extensive work undertaken to really understand our costs. Last year, we have recognised this as a year of discovery for us. We were finding things during the course of the year. Our ability to understand our costs month to month and have more accuracy around our forecasting has absolutely improved, and we're seeing that with a more stable forecasting during the first part of this year. So we do need to absolutely make sure going into next year that our mandate has clear funding lines attached to it. If we are being asked to do new services or change services, that there is a clear funding line attached to that mandate. We do need to consider the current pause in the transformation programme and understand when that programme restarts in April, that we are not incurring any additional costs. So there is some sort of due diligence work required as we go into next year about not incurring costs in our mandate that we are not funded for, and also transformation costs. Just sort of looking to the, I guess, the day-to-day operational aspects of financial control. One of the key things is making sure our workforce costs, our staff costs are aligned with financing. So the PIP system aligned with our finance system. We had to do a huge piece of validation, paper validation on that in order to make sure that at the start of the year, the workforce that we had established for was aligned with the budgets. There is a technical solution currently being looked at to allow that to happen, because that is fundamental in terms of being able to start the year with a clear position about what posts we have funded and to hold those departments to account during the course of the year for their budgets. The technical solution is being put in place. As I say, I think it does require us to be very clear about the mandate requirements and the funding for that, and also another sort of key risk area where we're putting a lot of work into understanding the expenditure and the forecasting of the expenditures around the tertiary budget. So there's a huge amount of work going on, supported through the Finance and Performance Committee, to understand the amount of work that we are sending across to the UK. It has been highly volatile in terms of drifting out between £3 and £5 million each year, depending on how the NHS in the UK is responding to its restoration and recovery plan. But we're getting closer to the detail on that. So I think, Chair, this is work in progress. I think we are much, much clearer than what we were this time last year around our ability to forecast, our ability to control spend at care group level, good processes around business case review groups, and we will continue to work on the gaps in assurance that have been identified in the back. But I think we've got a clearer plan for this year, and then we go on to work of how we create that financially sustainable position from next year onwards. And I'm happy to take questions, or perhaps there's anything Nigel or Sam wanted to contribute.
Okay, Andy first. So Teresa, one of the areas that obviously is very difficult to say on is the tertiary spend. I mean, I know the routes are related to the stage, but do you know, do we know roughly when that's likely to be in the material stakes that will have a grip on that tertiary spend?
I'm not sure. I think it's going through finance and performance, and I think there's probably another couple of months worth of work to be able to get underneath that. So we are actually forecasting rather than just reflecting what's coming through on the SAM data.
So I think the point is, it'll be too late to actually account for it for the 23-24 budget, but it's more about being able to see exactly the direction of travel by that point, by April as well. So kind of in my mind,
yes,
FPNC, if there's a full vision hit by April, so you can release the sound, alarm bells, or take extra steps as soon as possible after that point. But I think that's crucial because it's the moment in which there is the least visibility.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a priority of finance and performance to get that level of visibility on tertiary spend, and not just from a finance perspective, but clearly if there are opportunities to prevent work from having to be transferred across to the UK, or indeed repatriate work, we would clearly take that opportunity. So we have, and it's part of the work with MIAA, to look at what some sort of referral management process can sit in that space to be able to help us have increased visibility, not just from a finance perspective, but from a quality and a patient safety perspective too.
I entirely agree with that. Through you, if I may, Andrew, entirely agree with that. And obviously, we sit on FBNC and we see these figures monthly. I think the difficulty is in this area is the sheer unpredictability of it. I think there's a massive amount of work going on around our alliance partners and with whom we contract and how we contract and the process around that. But clearly, one or two patients in a particular area could don't want to triple our spend.
What contracts with them increase effect?
Yeah. I think the other element is that we are trying to move to an activity-based budgeting system in a reactive state. And I think, entirely agree with what Teresa said about the non-accountants. It's very, very impressive. There's a lot of numbers going on here, a lot of numbers going on and moving around. But what we're doing at FPNC is I felt that in our year of discovery that we've referred to, is that we were very much on the back foot in that first year, reacting to a budget that had been given to us, reacting to things that were coming at us from different directions. You then overlay COVID, and you don't need me to tell you what kind of state the world is in at the moment. It's a very volatile, difficult place with the pressures and tensions of inflation, political change, volatility, energy costs, and war in Europe. These are very, very difficult times. So we have to cut our cloth to our means. It was one very reassuring to get into the bath. And I think we are it's good in parts. It's like the cure say. We're moving forward. There's better communication. I would incidentally just like to take a moment to congratulate the team in Jackie's absence and her team, because you'll see later on in the agenda we are considering 30 30th of September accounts at this point in time, and we're only on the 1st of November, so this is a significant improvement in terms of visibility of reporting, and very, very pleasing indeed. So challenges ahead, but moving towards a balanced budget, which is terrific.
Very good. Can I do a couple of general points? First of all, this is what the Board Assurance Framework is supposed to do, so it's good to see it doing that. It's really the first time this level of deep dive in the board, so that in itself is excellent. The second general point is, as has been said, we are now much more confident of the year end than we were 4 or 5 months ago, and that is extremely good progress. The one gap, to my mind, is that the year end objective is dependent on achieving CIP. And my imagination is that there's not one CIP project, there's dozens of CIP projects, some of which will succeed, some of which may not succeed in year. And what I'd really quite like is to go to the Finance Committee to see the full range of CIP. And I'm used to ascribing a percentage of success likelihood to each of them. I believe that work exists already. But I think that would give us the added assurance that the CIP program is going to deliver this year as well. So I'm not asking for it now.
No, I think it's fair comment, because we had quite an early Finance Performance Committee meeting this month on the 13th of October, and that was deliberate to ensure attendance by key players, essentially. The disadvantage of that is we didn't have sight of the 30th September accounts, but I think by next month and then the next public board meeting, we will have more visibility of these CIP projects, and there are as many as 60 or 70 ongoing at any one time, and I think we have already risk-rated them and applied a likelihood, and I believe in these projections we have discounted those that we maybe feel are not likely to achieve the full savings and efficiencies that we
That's reassuring to hear that.
So actually, that reminds me, just finished on exactly the point I was going to raise, in that I'm glad the team had risk-rated and reduced the likely yield from these, so that there's a much better chance of success.
So accounting terms is always a place to build improvements.
Absolutely. I believe next time we're going to do locals, are we? Locals?
I think so, yes. I think we have set the future plan that we laid out. We've got the next 2 or 3 deep dives identified.
Good. Okay. Thanks again. Let's move on. Well, next you've got my chair's report, which I don't propose to read out. I don't think there's anything to add to it at the moment, so I'll just take that as read. So we move on to Trish.
Thank you, Chair. And as ever, there's a number of items that I would like to just share before, and the Horizon scan really details the amount of very good work that is going on across the organisation, identified by 10 different groups. Just picking up a couple of things that I'd like to mention from the Horizon scan. It was a great honour to attend the Chief Constable's Award ceremony on the 3rd of October, and would like to pay tribute to 2 of our staff members, David Smith and Jennifer Shannon. Graduations on the 7th of October. So 2 very nice events. Just picking up some of the key bits from the Chief Executive's report, I would just like to confirm that the October submission to the Information Commissioner around our plan to respond to all of the actions required from the penalty notice was made on time and is making good progress, and the Chief Information Officer can answer any further questions on that if the board have any. The Association of Perioperative Practitioners visited Nobles Hospital, a return visit to review the progress made. We had a baseline assessment last year, and they attended on the 28th and 29th of September this year. I went to the informal feedback session. We are still waiting the final report, but I'm very pleased to report that the AFPP team said that the theatre department had made very good progress towards accreditation, and the areas which had previously been identified as amber in the previous visit were now achieving green. Evident that significant progress had been made, that our theatres were safe, and they evidenced significant cultural improvement, which was also very pleasing to hear. We obviously still have the improvement work, but I think it's very encouraging to receive that verbal feedback, and obviously once we receive the final report, we will bring that back through the board. At the last board, we talked about the ENT action plan, and myself, the Director of Operations and the Medical Director have been working on that action plan with the service. There is a brief update in the report, and there's a detailed report in the private section, but just to give assurance that we now have a comprehensive action plan in place, which is responding to access around inpatients and outpatients, how we support on-call arrangements, the use of data, looking at governance arrangements, equipment, and how we staff the department to be sustainable in the longer term. I've included in the report, I'm doing a number of back to the floor sessions over the next 2 to 3 months as part of my ongoing commitment to Ask Me Anything and Chief Exec's Visibility Programme, and I've just listed those in the report just for information. Also, we have held the first Equality, Diversity and Inclusion group. I am going to chair that group going forward, and I would like the board to consider whether it's appropriate for an executive champion for EDI to be identified. The assessment of Manx care by the DHSC, this is a formal document. We've talked here and brought back through our annual report the assessment against our mandate for 21-22. I think it's fair to say that mandate was quite aspirational. It was the first year, but we made good progress on a number of areas, not least our response to COVID and improving our response and governance around waiting lists and waiting time management. So it is just the formal assessment by the DHSC, which is included in Appendix 1, which has been through Comin and will be laid before Tynwald. As I say, it does reflect our feedback and the content of our annual report. I think there's just a couple of things to note that clearly we've been on a journey around our data and digital piece, and particularly our business intelligence data. So within that appendix, there are a number of areas where we haven't had the data available to secure and to provide evidence there. We've certainly moved on significantly in that respect. And obviously the letter also does reference the financial governance arrangements in order to avoid the need for Manx Care to go back for any supplementary votes. So I think those are the two things which we have focused on in the board around our response to business intelligence, the data and digital agenda, plus also our responsibilities are around our financial management. I wanted just to finally confirm, again, another good news story. We were inspected by the Macmillan Quality Environment team on the 4th of October, and we received their report at the end of last week, and our Manx breast unit at Nobles Hospital has been successful in achieving the Macmillan Quality Environment mark with the maximum score and an excellent rating. So I think that's really, really good news for the service. They had an open day last week, which was well attended, and thank you to all involved in that. And I'd just like to sort of personally mark my thanks to Julie Stokes, David Gorn, and the charities who support us so greatly in improving services for ladies with breast cancer and supporting that unit. And I think the sort of quality mark, excellent rating, is a reflection of the joint working between ourselves and the cancer charities on this. And that is a whistle stop, but I'm happy to take any questions on my report. As I say, I would like the board to consider whether we have an EDI champion from the NEDS, and also ask the ENT action plan to be moved over into the Quality and Safety Engagement Committee for further monitoring.
Thanks, Teresa. We will cover those two questions, but let me first of all see if anybody has any comments or questions.
So, with regard to the letter from DHSC regarding case performance, so we previously, you obviously prefaced that by saying about and also acknowledge all that unfunded mandate requirements. So, one of the things that perhaps my personal feeling is that we've got, I'll take the example of Objective 7, we've got the RTT waiting time information in that, which is completely unfunded. Because that's an unfunded initiative in my mind, are we going to go back and challenge this quite firmly? Because we must, because a mandate should not be aspirational, it must be firmly in real now. Aspirations for something else, mandate is literally, this is your to-do list, and this is the funding that comes with it to manage that to-do list. So, are we absolutely going to challenge these bits? Let's say, like,
So, I mean, you make a very fair general point. How can you put something into a mandate if it's not funded? I think we've described how we are heading towards financial balance for this year, irrespective of that. And of course, there is a process which is underway now to drop the mandate for next year, for which that will be very important. So my suggestion is that we try and address it through next year's mandate rather than trying to reopen the issue of this year's mandate in the context of us actually being on target anyway. But I don't know, Teresa.
Yeah, I completely accept the point, and there is a point of learning that it was the first year we set a mandate which we have now identified was completely unrealistic, or some funding lines not attached to key pieces of work which required outcomes. We have been scored and assessed accordingly in terms of partial achievement against that. This was last year, and I think we've got a very clear narrative that's outlined in our annual report in response to this. This year's mandate is better in that there are still some unfunded lines, but it was nowhere near the magnitude of last year's. And I would agree with the chairman that it's most important we just make sure that we are being very, very clear about those unfunded lines in this year's mandate and our response to it, plus making sure we do not perpetuate anything. So having a very clear position going into next year that if things are in the mandate, they have a clear funding line attached to them. And we've already started those discussions with the DHSC. There's been 2 workshops already about what the mandate for next year looks like. And I think, in light of the financial position, the wider financial position of the island, then, we need to be sort of setting a very realistic mandate and not setting expectations which ultimately we cannot fulfil because we can't fund. So I think we just use it as a point of learning, actually.
Okay, thank you, that sounds quite satisfactory. Thank you.
Tim?
I'd just like to welcome the equality and diversity work, and just say, for me, it gives a sense that we can focus on this, and we can focus on the finance, and we can focus on the clinical work as well. Because I think all too often some areas get missed, and equality and diversity is one of those. But I'd really welcome this and just praise the team for having taken this forward.
I was waiting for the offer to become the non-executive EDI champion. Was that where you? I don't want to put you on the spot. We can do it outside this meeting if you like.
I think probably so.
Can I just ask you a couple of things? I mean, first of all, I really commend you doing back to the floor, and I might commend other executive directors to do the same as well. I know it's, you're all far too busy to do some time back to the floor, but if the chief executive can find the time, then I thought the other executives can too, and I think you'll really enjoy it if you do it and learn a lot from it as well. I would recommend that. The second thing is that in the report from DHC, they have a red rating, and the two areas that they rate us as red are to do with finance. Right, I think we just heard that we are now in a position where we should be not in a red position anymore. The other is to do with carbon reduction. Now, that's not something that we have discussed all year. And Aaron, is it fair, Aaron, to put you on the spot and say, do you know where we're up to in terms of discussion about next year's carbon reduction and whether we can have something more realistic?
Not yet, no. We haven't been providing some information, but we haven't had a formal sit down yet.
Right. But this was it was objective number 12, if I remember, in this year's mandate, which sort of appeared and disappeared several times. Seems a bit tough that we're rated red for it now, but again, something that can be put right for next year.
Yes, I think, it doesn't feel fair that this wasn't within our control. We were waiting for the wider government policy on climate matters. And, but yes, I think we're just better off focusing on making sure what is in our mandate going forward is all achievable, deliverable and realistic and funded.
And just to remind the board that to a very significant extent we do not manage our own estate. We get that service from other departments.
Andrew, could I possibly just say a word about finance? I think as a sort of general comment, I can understand absolutely why we'd be rated as red, but I think in this particular year I would re-emphasise the fact that we, with a little bit of help from our friends, admittedly, we are moving towards a small deficit which we believe will be extinguished by the end of this financial year. And we still have 6 months to go in this financial year to claw that back. And we're currently about 2.5 million adrift on an overall budget of 300 million. So, that puts it in perspective. So I think picking up your points about mitigation and about risk rating on the various SIP projects, I think, we're within shooting distance of that, which is very encouraging. I think going forward, and it's my Spider-Man comment, is that you can't have power without responsibility and vice versa. So I think there will need to be robust and realistic discussions around the mandate for next year. And I think, I talk a lot in Finance Subcommittee about alignment of interests. We have to strive to ensure that our communication upstream and downstream is aligned and very clear. And I don't make any issue about that, but we will have to do it.
Okay, so just in terms of your 2 points of recommendation, can I just invite any non-executive director who would be willing to do the EDI role to just let me know outside of this meeting? I mean, frankly, I'd be happy to do it if nobody wants to, but if one of you would do it, great. You probably.
I think there'll be a lot of interest.
Good. That'd be ideal. It should be well suited to it. The second point is the one about the ENT action plan. Should it be overseen by quality and safety? I think the only question is whether it's quality and safety or whether it's finance and performance, because it's sort of a bit mixed, isn't it?
It was originally an escalation from the quality and safety
Was it? Okay.
Engagement committee, because we haven't got the level of progress we've been wanting to see.
Yeah.
But I think now we have got a very clear action plan and a level of progress. I would support, I would encourage it to go back into its governance route.
I think that's right.
Sure.
I think that's right, but I think there is an aspect which probably also should be finance and performance, which is the waiting list itself, and waiting list management. So if you look at the waiting list per 100,000 for our ENT, it's about 3 times the size of the worst UK one. So, the average UK one, and it's actually right at the very top of every UK trust group, if you like. And I think that probably is a performance issue, which I think needs some other action apart from the safety aspects, safety and quality aspects.
Okay, but I think there is agreement that it should be generally the quality and safety committee monitors.
Generally, yes. I think it's just that one aspect. I think
performance will monitor all
extra focus.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anything else on Teresa's reports? Sorry?
Just one question, Teresa. When you actually invited the non-execs to be the EDI champion on the board, but have you got a plan to, have you got an EDI strategy, or do we actually have an EDI champions at a service level, which is the key bit, not really at board?
Yeah, no, thank you, Shreek. It's a good point. You know, I think we have a low level of maturity around our EDI plan, but it's incredibly important as part of our plan. We are inviting EDI champions from across the organisation to identify themselves and to be part of the group. We've identified a couple of key priorities around sort of zero tolerance and some of our policy frameworks. And yes, I think, and what was your second question?
Just a service level EDI champions, that's what, will you have an EDI strategy and direction?
Yes, I think one of the things that I've committed to as part of that inaugural meeting is to, as part of our sort of strategy suite for next year, have an EDI strategy from next April, which I think will be quite modest in its aspirations, but I think it's really, really important we start this work. It's long overdue, incredibly important. We know our staff has signalled a need for this for a long time, and I just want to see this work start and take some shape over the next 6 months, and with a clear strategy going into next year.
Thank you.
And your assistance is most appreciated.
Oh, well, absolutely. I'm definitely there. I wanted to assist ED, non-exec, whoever is leading on it, at a service level. I want to be a part of that as well. Yes.
No, thank you, Sri. Your input and support is hugely valued. Thank you.
Yeah.
Teresa, could I just extend the same question to be inclusive of genders and people with disability as well as race?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that should be what EDI means. It should be not just ethnicity, it should be every characteristic.
Yeah, and we've had the discussions about the sort of the core groups that sit as part of that forum, and we really want to take a sounding from the workforce as to which ones are most pertinent and ones that we would want to take forward as those groups.
Good, thank you. So, do we move on to the committee chairs' reports? Tim, you're first.
I think that's in front of you. The EMT review has been discussed. The theatre improvement plan has also been mentioned, and just to highlight the complaints a policy that was also agreed and discussed, and part of that discussion was around ensuring that patients and complainants get what they want out of the complaint, as well as it being a process that's timely and works in governance processes, not to forget the complainant and the person who's raised the concern, and for that to be a part of that process. I don't know if Director of Nursing has anything.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, I mean, I will expand on complaints, Chairman, because I think colleagues will be aware that we are not as responsive as we would expect to be or need to be, and I think that causes me a great deal of concern on this board, because not only has someone had cause to complain because their experience wasn't satisfactory, we've compounded that by delaying a satisfactory response to people. So I wanted to just acknowledge in this room that we are aware of this and taking steps, quite rigorous steps now, to put this right. And it coincides with some changes to the complaint regulations on the island, which has allowed me to review the policy and the procedures and the process. So behind the scenes at the moment there's an enormous amount of work going on, but the absolute focus and the absolute intention is to be able to learn from the things that are not quite right for people who use our services and respond to those issues faster, so that people have confidence that we're a listening and learning organisation. That will be my focus over the next few months, and I assure the board that we will improve the position on that.
Good. It is pleasing to see that focus on complaints, because I think all of us had seen examples where we weren't happy with the speed or quality of some of the response to complaints, so good to see that. Okay. Nigel, FP&C.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, through you, if I may. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have the papers in front of you from quite an early Finance and Performance and Commissioning Committee meeting on the 13th of October. We've talked quite a lot about the board assurance framework and risk number 6, and hopefully you've got a good feeling for what's going on there. In the housekeeping arena, we also reviewed our terms of reference for the committee to make sure that they were still current in a changing world, and we feel that they are. And we also considered some initial work and papers on, you may recall from the last meeting, we had been cited on some concerns around private and public sector nursing home costs, GP and consultant salaries, and some really good, interesting work has been carried out, very positive work actually, in and around this, living our principles of honouring our contracts to the letter, but also looking at how we move forward. And we gained some real assurance, I think, from Sri, the medical director, around consultants and the great work you've been doing in actually filling permanent posts at the consultant level, which is terrific and has a financial effect, of course. Very encouraging indeed. GP contracts are very complex and clearly a sensitive area, but I think we were excited about the prospects and about the possibilities in this area of additional services for GPs, and that was, I thought, very encouraging indeed. And then a sort of more closer look at private and public sector nursing homes. And this is clearly an ongoing piece of work, but there is more than anecdotal evidence to suggest that the costs of this area and the opportunity costs of this area respectively do need more work and do need more consultation, and I think that's a piece of work that is going to be played out over the next 3 months or so. So we will be coming back to you on that. We've talked about the 23-24 budget challenges and the tensions that will exist around that, but you know, we talk a lot about getting alignment, and clearly it will be no secret to you that there will need to be discussions between the department and Treasury and our stakeholders around that mandate and around that budget going forward. But there are some good things too, in that funding levels have been agreed and we're moving towards a 3-year plan, which I think is very good news indeed. Tertiary spend, again, we are looking very closely at that. We've already had a little bit of a conversation around that. And we'd also had an excellent presentation from Mr. Hutchinson and Mr. Baird on the restoration and recovery. And I think what was very clear at the detailed presentation that we received at Finance and Performance was around this very important and serious piece of work, that actually the whole exercise had been really, really positive, not only in terms of reducing waiting lists, but in terms of other achievements that we've set ourselves as goals around culture, that exchange of culture, that exchange of working practice, the financial value that it represented to our island, which clearly our stakeholders will be very interested in. And I thought that was, and it seemed as though it had been fun and is fun. And this is really good news, because people that are enjoying themselves in their work will work more efficiently and better. And this I thought was just really, really encouraging. So in a finance committee talking about culture and talking about other things, which I thought was very encouraging. There's been a lot of progress made around the financial exemption work, which is, just to remind you, to streamline the way in which we liaise with the department and with Treasury around purchasing and around buying things in, to make it seamless, to make it easier, quicker, more efficient, without any dilution of the governance or the control elements to that. So that too was discussed at the committee. That's about it. Very happy to take questions. Andy?
Thank you. Listen, obviously I was at FP&C, and I know we talked about the private and public sector nursing home bit in escalation. And that all of a sudden I'm not clear, and so please forgive me, but is the deep dive going to be done at FP&C, or are the board going to do the deep dive into this now?
I think I think we're recognising that this is a big piece of work, Andy, and I think that
and obviously you're going to take over GP pay and GP contracts to audit effectively. Yeah, it's going to be a work in progress that's not going to be finished overnight. So I think what we will do is we'll be debating it quite hard at FP&C and then escalating it to the board as it goes forward.
I wasn't quite sure it is the whole thing escalating. You're going to escate once we've...
I think it's an immature project at the moment, so I think we now know we need to look at it. We need to talk to the stakeholders in that area and consult with them to make sure that we are getting the right kind of feedback. But that's an ongoing process. Yeah.
Sweet.
And can I just add something else, Nigel? I think I just wanted to kind of assure the board that every single action what we did in the Manx care the last year, it's not just been all about the finance. The agenda will tell you whatever is picked up on the quality agenda, which is the quality and safety, it's been now picked up in the finance as well. So it is a proper QSIP. I wouldn't like to call it as a cost improvement program, but quality cost improvement. So I think it's just a kind of alignment both with the quality and finance at the highest level, not just at the operational level.
Andrew, can I come back on that, please?
Yep.
Thank you, Sri. I think it's a really important point because, money is very important, and I've said before, and you've heard me say it, that it's one crude way in which we measure ourselves. But what I was very encouraged about, particularly at the last Finance and Performance Commissioning meeting, was that there is real evidence, and this is a subjective, touchy-feely thing, but there's real evidence of cross-party pollination. So, every action has a reaction, and we're talking in finance about culture, and we're talking about value for money, and we're talking about that knock-on effect, which I think is really interesting. It's very good news.
Right, okay, shall we move on? So, a moment that we've been waiting for, the new improved integrated performance report. It's been promised to arrive in November, and here it is. So, it does need a sort of roll of drums or something like that. So, Oliver, you're going to introduce this?
Yes, thanks. So as you said, Andrew, we've finally delivered the new revamped integrated performance report, which has got a number of new elements in it, the first of which being it's now a month more in advance. So rather than looking at the 2 months previous, we're now looking at the month previous, which is quite a challenge considering the fact that boards are normally on the 1st to the 2nd of the month, but we've managed to achieve it this month and have got plans in place too so that we can achieve it from every other month thereafter. The format of the report has changed quite considerably. It's now a lot easier to digest. We've significantly reduced the number of metrics that are displayed in the report. We've reorganised the report into the CQC domains, and where at the moment we're mostly looking at the effective and responsive domains. We are looking to incorporate the contents of the care quality dashboard, which is next on the agenda, into this. So it will become a report that not only I present, but Sally presents, Paul presents, she presents. So it will be the single source of truth around performance for Manx care. It's got quite a bit more statistical analysis in it, so that we know where we benchmark against compared to the UK. We know where there is special cause variation, and we also can see there is statistical process control in there, so we can see where we are improving or where an area is deteriorating with a much more rigour. So in terms of the executive summary, I'll just go through the effective and responsive elements, because I know Paul's got his section after, and I don't want to repeat things. But in terms of things that are going well, the organisation's admission rate from emergency department remains low compared to the UK. We're seeing the benefits of both the restoration and recovery programme that we've already talked about today, within the actual numbers of patient waiting for an inpatient or a diagnostic procedure. We're seeing good ambulance service performance against category 2 to 5, despite an increasing demand, a significant increase in demand. and the mental health caseloads remain within expected levels. In terms of CIPs, 60% of the CIP target is delivered to date, with efficiency savings of 500k delivered so far this year. In terms of causes of concern, emergency care demand remains high. We've seen about 5 months of increasing demand month on month, which has had an impact on ED 4-hour performance. We've seen the impact of our small footprint on ED having an impact on exit block and also handovers of ambulances. We've seen an increase in 2-week wait referrals into the organisation and some specialist workforce shortages, which have had an impact on our ability to see 2-week waits. So people who have been referred into the hospital for suspected cancer, we've seen a deterioration in the 2-week wait performance within that. Access to routine diagnostics within 6 weeks remains a challenge. We are achieving it in some areas. For example, within an endoscopy, we are seeing people within 6 weeks, but we're struggling to do that within some modalities within the radiology department, for example, MR scans and ultrasound. And category 1 ambulance response times remain above threshold, and as I say, there were 14 handover time breaches within September where the handover time was more than 30 minutes. That was all of the executive summary that I wanted to cover, but to answer any questions.
Yes, no, thank you. I think I'd just like to get some assurance that the areas that are causing some concern, that we have recovery action plans in place, monitored through the performance and delivery group.
Yeah, so where my personal area of concern and focus at the moment is around 2-week waits, because we've seen quite a considerable reduction in our performance there, mainly across breast, colorectal and dermatology. Within breast, that has been due to a absence of specialist staff, which has caused a reduction. We have recovered that in October. We've put in a number of additional clinics which have increased the capacity of the symptomatic clinic service, and we've also in the last couple of weeks seen our new breast radiologist been appointed. Within colorectal, it's a combination of increased demand and also an absence of a specialist member of the team, but we've put in a number of evening clinics over November and December to cover that, both within the clinic side and also the endoscopy side. And within dermatology, because we don't have a dermatologist on island at the moment, we are reliant on off-island support. Basically the specialist nurses within our dermatology service on island working with off-island providers and our plastic surgeons. That arrangement is working, but we're just about to advertise for a dermatologist to shore up that service so that we can bring it back on island. So we do have areas, we do have recovery plans within all those areas.
Could I also just ask, and again, I think it's just more to take away, but I think our ability to respond to long length of stay is, we've seen through the planned care route the impact of reducing length of stays had on the efficiency of our bed use. And going into winter, if we can start to optimise length of stay, and I would suggest there is a piece of work to be undertaken between the Director of Operations and the Executive Director of Social Care to look at the transfer out of medically optimised patients into the community as quickly as possible, and I guess lubricating some of the funding around that in order to make sure that the hospital beds are freed up as we go into a difficult winter period. So could I perhaps ask the Director of Ops to take that forward?
Yeah, that's...
Thinking with Sam. Thank you.
We've noticed, just to respond on the length of stay, we have noticed an issue that's not necessarily linked to length of stay, it's linked to recording of discharge on the Medway system. That's linked with some delays in having the e-discharge completed, but myself and Sri are working together to get that sorted. And I think when we first started, there was maybe about 15 or 20 patients who had a long length of stay because their e-discharge hadn't been completed. But we got an update on that yesterday, and I think it's down to 2 or 3. So that we should start seeing an impact. But we do realise that there is an issue about long length of stay, and the use of spot purchase beds is within our winter plan.
And also, can I just add, Teresa, as you know that we're getting 2 more new geriatricians coming up in the coming months, and that should give us kind of a boost into community treatment, and so that should actually add to our force, as it was, frontline force, reducing the length of stay.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's just incredibly important. We know that hospital isn't the best place for patients who are medically optimised, and it is going to be so critically important we have good flow through the hospital during winter, and a lot of it is within our gift.
Can I just ask Ola a question before we move on to Paul's section? I mean, first of all, this is enormously improved. And great credit to everybody that's involved in it. It's so much easier to use now, and it looks to me more like what I'm used to. But inevitably, I'm going to ask a little bit more. When we had the orthopedic consultants here, they said, I think our maximum wait is now 11 months. Could we see that across all specialties?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of work on waiting list validation. We think we know there's around 20,500 records that need to be validated on both the inpatient and the outpatient. We're prioritising the R&R specialties. Those specialties will be validated by the end of December, and so we will have a very accurate position on both the inpatient and the outpatient weights by then. We've also just in the last month appointed a validation manager on a secondment for 12 months, and we will be recruiting to some charitable funding, recruiting for validators. We expect the validation to be all done within 6 months, but then there will be a piece of work to then validate other waiting lists, for example, mental health, therapies, etc. So we're not just concentrating on the hospital. We're wanting to do all waiting lists.
So when we get the December report, which will probably be at the beginning of February, won't it? That should have the answer to my question.
Yeah, I'm looking at my able assistant at the end there. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, that's again a significant step forward. And I presume we're no longer sending inaccurate information to GPs, which we were doing for a while.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, Paul?
Chairman, thank you. Can I also just lend my enormous thanks to Oliver and Richard for the production of this report, and it fills me with a great deal of confidence that we're moving in the right direction. I recognise some of the methodology here as belonging to making data count from NHS England, and when I was first introduced to that, as a board we went through an educational event to see how good we were at working with data like this to understand variation, and more importantly whether there was a realistic prospect of achieving the results. And I wonder whether we might do that as a board as well, just so that when we start looking and interpreting this data, we have an appreciation for how best to interpret it. But Teresa, if I may, I wonder if you would allow me to, now that we have this IPR, to incorporate the quality dashboard, but at the same time perhaps simplify and rationalise some of the measures that we've got, so that we're focusing on our quality priorities more directly and the quality risks that are most important to the board, which would give us a chance to apply a bit of prioritisation and focus. If you're content, I'd like to do that. But in terms of the performance for quality this month, I want to say that I am hugely encouraged by the progress that we continue to make. And I do invite the board to look at the trend line, because that is the most important journey that we're on. And for colleagues, just in case, I'm referring here to the quality dashboard as well as the IPR. And I want to say from the outset that I do have a very high standard for quality. I make no apologies for that. I think patients deserve that. And so whilst we are making progress in the right direction, there are a number of indicators that we've not yet achieved the level of compliance that we're aiming for. But that nevertheless reflects the fact that we are making progress. And I want to pay tribute to the staff on the ground, the front line, the doctors, the nurses, the allied health professionals, and all the teams that support them. It's because of their combined efforts that we're able to make some progress. And the wide range of indicators that are showing progress as being good, better or improving are many. And I just want to emphasise a few because I think these are important. We do very well compared to our counterparts in England on the rates of harmful falls in hospital settings. I think this is a phenomenal reflection of the work we do to assess and mitigate the risk for some people. It's very difficult to pull off, especially when staffing is difficult. But it's a testament to the hard work and dedication of the staff that we're able to have such a low level of harmful falls in hospitals. This does not mean that people don't fall, because in fact it's very difficult to strike the right balance between optimising independence, and we were hearing earlier on today about enabling people to be discharged within 1.5 days following a replacement joint. To do that, we're going to have to encourage and drive and enable people to get mobile again, and that it's inevitable that sometimes that results in people having falls, but the fact we have harmful falls is so low is very good. The other thing is we're very good at proactive management of quality in relation to venous thromboembolism, which is the mitigation of risk of the acquisition of blood clots. This is a problem for some people who are normally quite mobile, suddenly become immobile. They can develop blood clots, but that risk is mitigated really well here. We're managing that very well. We have incredibly low levels of what we would call alert organisms, and this is in relation to infection prevention. So MRSA, Clostridium difficile, we have low levels of exposure to those bugs in hospitals, and that's largely down to the staff, their hand hygiene practices, the cleaning routines that we go through, the decontamination of patient shared equipment. We put an awful lot of attention to that, and it is paying off. And we're also very good at antimicrobial stewardship, which is the way we manage antibiotics. I don't want to go into the complexities of it, but it's essential that we have very good control over that. And that control is improving, Teresa. And I think I'm optimistic that will get even better than it is now. And we focus in here on medicines, and I'm conscious in a number of places people pick out the numbers, but I just need to put it in context. If you consider medicines as a series of events, from prescribing, from the dispensing, from the administration, to the storage, to the disposal, that process encompasses lots of different transactions. And if you add up the number of medicines transactions that we would carry out in a typical year in a hospital like ours, we're talking about millions. If you extend that to medicines transactions that take place in the hospital and in the community, you've really got massive multiples. So when you look at the numbers of events that we capture, they represent an incredibly low risk, and I have to emphasise that. That is good assurance to the board that we're managing these issues quite well, and I'm very pleased with it. And the other thing I would say is about gender appropriate accommodation, which is our ability to segregate male and female patients, is a massive challenge in most healthcare situations, but here on the Isle of Man, we are managing that really, really well, and I'm very pleased with that. We've got control over serious incident exposure, Teresa. We managed to bring that down to levels which are more normal. Again, I'm very, very pleased with that. So, lots to be very proud of. Huge progress that we've been making over the last few months in particular. I would like to say I have given a full account to the QSE, Teresa, on the indicators that are not under control. And I don't necessarily want to go through that again for the board, but I'll just highlight the areas where I have given a full account because it's something we're working on. One of the things is blood culture contamination rate, which is the number of false positive results. There are a number of factors that lead to that, which we're tackling in clinical departments where we have some concerns with that. Malnutrition screening is something I expect to be carried out on every patient, on every admission. And for those that have an extended length of stay, it's repeated at least every 7 days. And this is important to make sure that patients are properly hydrated and receiving the right levels of diet and nutrition that they require. We are making good progress on this. It's improving, but it isn't at the level I would need. And my colleagues are working on this one. We are taking steps, Sri and I both explained this to the QSE, to remedy the slow progress around mortality reviews. And we're both confident now that this will start to accelerate now that we've got some key appointments in place. And we're already starting to see some data coming through that, which is incredibly helpful to the QSE. And as has already been mentioned, I'm taking steps to remedy unsatisfactory performance in relation to complaints. It's my expectation, Teresa, that we will improve this, and I hope in the next month or two to be able to give assurance to the board along those lines. So all in all, broadly, really positive, but there are some things that we are focusing on as a team.
Thank you, Paul. And I think you said at the start of that it's your intention to now merge the quality dashboard with the integrated performance report. Approximately how long do you think that will take?
Well, I hope it will take no longer than a week.
Oh, excellent. Well, look forward to that next time then, with a bit of luck. Good. Okay. I know that the Quality and Safety Committee did go through the quality dashboard. Any further questions? No? Okay. Right, we've got a bit further down the agenda than expected, but I suggest that we now take a 10-minute comfort break and we'll resume at 10 past. We're now on to item 156. So this is the review of self-neglect. And I know we've got Michelle here. I think Teresa's going to introduce it.
Yeah, I'm just going to give a short summary, and then Michelle will perhaps add some of the more detail around the recommendations. So the Isle of Man Safeguarding Board commissioned a serious case review of self-neglect after a series of deaths. So there was one index case who we referred to as Robin, who's a pseudonym, but there was also other cases which were very similar in themes, and therefore there was a thematic review which explored the circumstances around these 7 deaths, including Robin's death, all attributed to self-neglect. The serious case review was published a couple of weeks ago with the Safeguarding Board and all the partner agencies on the board contributing to that publication, a briefing of Tynwald and media. I think the sad thing about all of these cases is that these individuals were in some respect known to services. I think it highlights the lack of Mental Capacity Act on the island. All of these individuals sort of had capacity and also had the means to fund changes to their lifestyle which would have removed them from that self-neglect position. There were recommendations. There was a recommendation around mental health services, around how to engage with people who don't necessarily attend appointments and don't engage with services. But one of the sort of key aspects in response for Manx care is to respond to that particular recommendation around mental health, but also to take forward that stronger multi-agency working, and we are now, the board signed off in September, and we are progressing with the multi-agency safeguarding hub in conjunction with the Isle of Man Constabulary, which is being led by Sally as the Executive Director for Social Care. So I'll probably leave Michelle to just talk about the key themes of that series case review. But what we're recommending to the board is we sort of acknowledge the report and we will bring our progress around the particular actions for Manx care through the Quality, Safety and Engagement Committee, but also that sort of wider piece really. I think mental capacity and its implementation is going to be a huge piece of work for us, and really, really important. We have the level of resourcing and oversight and scrutiny of that implementation, but also that wider piece of work around the multi-agency safeguarding hub, which we've all acknowledged is so incredibly important. So I'll just hand over to Michelle just for a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Teresa. I'd just like to remind everybody that safeguarding is extremely complex. Adult safeguarding and adult self-neglect is significantly quite complex work, and invariably every case is very different presentation. We're dealing with human beings in their home environment. It's very, very difficult to apply a set procedure when you're working with people in the community. The report, as Teresa says, has 2 recommendations. Teresa's touched on the mental health recommendation. In terms of the other recommendations, it's been broken down into 5 distinct areas that we need to look at in adult social work. One being a pathway, and the pathway really needs to be the team around the adults. So we're looking very much at how we can do that with immediate effect. One of the things that we have started to do daily in preparation for the integrated safeguarding team and further on with the MASH is around daily huddles in the safeguarding team, which now incorporate Manx care colleagues from health and mental health, and also includes associated colleagues such as our police and fire services. We also have one of the recommendations is around policies and procedures which detail the application of the pathway. One of the things that is sadly lacking for us are adult protection policies and procedures, and also self-neglect policy. But what we chose to do some months ago is to bring to Manx Care executive leadership team. Previously used policies for what was the DHSC, which had expired, and Manx Care executive leadership team approved them for immediate use. So we're using those until the work with the Safeguarding Board and multi-agency partners are in a position to produce and sign off new and updated ones. Training and supervision. We've recently held some level 3 safeguarding training across all social work and multi-agency partners. I know some executive leads came to that as well. I know Teresa attended. And self-neglect specifically is an area of training that the Safeguarding Board and adult social work are looking together to see if we can put together a multi-agency package that we're hoping to be able to deliver in the new year. Resources around how we work with people who self-neglect is something that is sharply brought into focus from the thematic review, in that we need to allow social workers and colleagues time to build up trustful relationships with people who self-neglect. And we as managers need to allow our staff the time to invest in building those trustful relationships to get any meaningful improvement for that person. And a big thing which is incorporated in both recommendations really is the recognition that we shouldn't work with people as individuals on their own. We should work with people in the context of a family, and that is something that we have taken on board. And I know, talking to mental health colleagues and head of mental health, Ross Bailey and I met last week, we discussed about how we would do that going forward. Teresa's already touched on assurance around our plans going forward in terms of the integrated safeguarding team, which is actually operational from today, the 1st of November, which sees some of Paul's staff, the Manx Care designated safeguarding lead for health, and some of her team moving alongside my adult social work statutory team. So that will greatly improve our joint working with children and families colleagues in the same building as we move towards the MASH model for next year. So I'll just invite any questions if anybody has anything that they'd like to ask me. Or Teresa, please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so well, go to the questions first of all. First of all, Oliver and then Andy.
Two questions, if I may. So, number one, whenever we talk about safeguarding and when that crosses organisational boundaries, inevitably there are concerns raised and questions asked about how that interacts with information governance and data sharing. To what extent is that being addressed here?
Okay, one of the things that we did, Oliver, some time ago, we knew obviously that this report was being undertaken by the board, the Safeguarding Board. So myself and Terry Banks, who's the safeguarding lead for Manx Care for Health, and a group of other people met with the board, the Safeguarding Board, to talk through the development of an information sharing protocol for safeguarding, which the Safeguarding Board has taken through. And that has now been signed off by the Safeguarding Board, and obviously Teresa sits on that board alongside other CEOs across government. So we have that now in place. We're very clear that sharing information, if it's for safeguarding, falls under the Caldecott principles, of which Shri has given us some helpful advice and information around. So we do feel that really we've forged ahead with our understanding across the multi-agency group around how we share information. So I hope that answers your question.
I wonder if it's quite mature enough in terms of the understanding that other sectors, for example GP practices as individual businesses, have completely understood and got across that, and whether there might be a bit of work to do to kind of disseminate that knowledge. But as you know, individual businesses would be concerned about sharing information because they're liable for fines directly from the information.
Chairman, would it help if I came in just to assist Oliver? Probably this is something I can discuss outside of the meeting with you, but I want to say a couple of things. When you study the serious events that have occurred in the seminal events relating to safeguarding in the UK and on the island, what comes forward from those reviews is that it's not a lack of sharing information that's the problem. It's not sharing too much information that's the problem. It's a lack of sharing and communication. And I can be quite confident with you that there is no impediment from GDPR or DPA in relation to the sharing information when it concerns the safeguarding of a vulnerable person. But I can take that offline with you. But be under no doubt, there is no problem with sharing information where there is a concern about the safety of any vulnerable person. And we must do that in order to protect them. I think that's what you're saying.
Thank you.
Okay, then Andy, Tim. Sorry, did you have a second question? Sorry.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, it was more of a comment really. That, you know, general practice in primary care, general practice at scale is. I've spoken to Sally already about this, and we're keen to get involved and work with the rest of Manx Care on this.
So, Andy?
So my question is a simple mechanistic one. So in the report it says that the report's accepted and that there will be periodic reports to QSE. Can you tell us how frequent those reports will be, or for instance, of the development of this?
I'll be honest with you, I don't have the answer for that.
I can assist with that if it helps. So we have a work programme for the QSE, of which safeguarding is one of the main headings that we will be tracking periodically through the various operational groups and feeding into QSE. So it will be looking at the assurances around self-neglect, but also giving the board confidence that the multi-agency safeguarding hub and the arrangements around that and the training and the progression of the safeguarding agenda is moving at the pace that it will give the board confidence. So we have that scheduled in as part of a work programme for the next 12 months.
So does that mean that the reporting that will be once you reach certain milestones in your
it will come regularly, so that you can be confident whether the assurance is positive or negative. You will get to hear where we're at.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, really welcome this report and commend the Isle of Man Safeguarding Board for commissioning this report, because sadly people die in self-neglected circumstances more often than we probably think, and to bring together a thematic review I think is quite leading edge in terms of taking that stand and then helping us learn from that. Talked about the MASH, the multi-agency hub, which I think is really important, and also about mental capacity legislation, which hasn't been here on the island but is coming forward. I think both those things are key to working around self-neglect. Just to touch on information sharing, and again, I'm probably going to get my terms wrong, but I think for medical practitioners, there's been some quite good advice from the medical defence,
and also the GMC has gone.
Yes. So in terms of sharing information, I think the medical defence have been more concerned about not sharing information and how that opens people to criticism, etc., rather than the sharing of information. So I just made that point. And also, interestingly, after the inquiry into child sexual abuse in England, there's a proposal to make sharing information a statutory requirement. So you'd be breaking the law by not sharing information in terms of safeguarding children in England. So I don't know if that's something that the government will consider here or not. So I just think it's really good to have this open and on the agenda. As we say, slight throwaway line that safeguarding is everybody's business. And this really does highlight for the population in terms of how's their neighbour, have they seen their neighbour, are there concerns about friends, family, and bringing up the issue of self-neglect, which is often very ahead. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim.
Teresa?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, put this in a little bit of a broader context. I think we've always, as an organisation, recognised the importance of really good safeguarding, recognised we were at a low level of maturity when Manx Care commenced. There has now been investment in safeguarding through the business case review group. And I think coming back to some of the discussions we had yesterday when we talked about how we progress with integrated care, I think we've got some real opportunities here through the local area coordination, the wellbeing hubs, our reach out into the community, our engagement and partnership working with the voluntary and community sectors, because I think one of the things we absolutely recognised, and Michelle touched upon it, was the importance of building relationships with these individuals who choose and prefer not to necessarily engage with statutory services, but actually a way in and a connection could be made with the voluntary and community sector, local area coordination. And I think just this endorses our model of that localness, that local approach to health and care delivery, which we sort of endorsed yesterday and have made that very strong commitment to build upon in our next strategy.
Can I just end up with asking what might be a stupid question? But I read this report and I thought it was very sad, a very sad set of circumstances, and I looked at the recommendations and I wondered if we implement all those, or if we had all those recommendations in place, would any of these lives have been saved? Now, I say it's a stupid question because I think it's an impossible question to answer, but in your opinion at least, was there a reasonable chance that these lives could have been saved?
I think so, Michelle, don't you?
Yeah.
Because actually these people were known to some of our services, and I think it was the concern about these people choosing to live in a certain way and professionals' hesitancy about when to intervene. And I do think if we'd have collectively put the agencies together and joined all the dots, there would have been a greater understanding and a greater sense of the need to intervene and respond to how these people were living. So I would say yes.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the way that you've just described that, bringing the professionals together, would have been a key point in identifying the person with the best relationship with that person, who could have taken more time on behalf of the multi-agency professional group to build that relationship and fed back into the multi-agency professional partnership for guidance and advice.
And I think Tim, you wanted to come back.
I was just going to say, and I think I can't answer that question, as you said. It was a question that one couldn't answer. But I think that more choices would have been given to those people, and they would have had a much better basis to make the decisions they were making. I think that's often the concern, is that people feel hopeless and don't feel they're able to make those kind of changes in their lives. And I think that the recommendations, bringing together a team around the person, sharing information, you would be able to give more support to those individuals who may have died, but would have had more choices, and would have been able to decide what they were going to do in a way that was supported. I think that's, for me, the sadness, is that it felt like people weren't supported in the way that they might have been to make those kind of choices.
Can I just come on to that as well, please, if I may? I think that model would also support the practitioner, because for the practitioner that is working with somebody in the community who is self-neglecting, it feels almost like an unsafe role to take on, because you are often powerless, you feel a little bit powerless. So I think that multi-agency professional team would also support the practitioner that is building that relationship to share the risks around and to get that specialist advice from a wider team. So I think that's also important to note too.
Okay, so thank you for the report, and I note Tim's observation that it's particularly good practice to have done this review, but we look forward to receiving the updates through Quality and Safety Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. So should we move on to the next one, which is the review of Respite?
This was a board action recognising that I think there are challenges around the level of respite provision we can provide as an organisation, both in terms of adults and children's respite provision. It is more to note that the DHSC are taking this work forward in conjunction with Friends. It is part of the DHSC departmental plan for 22-23 to undertake a gap analysis and basically understand what is required going forward. And then it would be translated through to Manx Care via the mandate in terms of any actions arising from that gap analysis. So the paper with the report is just the DHSC's position statement on that, and happy to try and answer any questions, but I think it may be that we may also need to refer this through to DHSC, or if there are any particular questions, pick those up in the DHSC mandate meeting, which is scheduled for early next week.
Okay, so are there any questions?
I just picked up one pretty bad typo, which was on whichever page it is, page 4, it says Korsakoff's dementia. I think they mean Korsakoff's psychosis. Not Korsakoff's dementia, whichever you prefer. I think it's Korsakoff. I think they mean Korsakoff's.
Yeah. Okay, well spotted. Any of us would have spotted that one? Any other? Two?
Just to welcome the work's been done on carers, and it's also including young carers, which I think is really important as well. And obviously for ourselves, the timely and good level of support to family carers really does have an impact on our services, and people being supported in the community, and informal caring arrangements being supported in the community means that people are where they should be, rather than coming into hospital in emergencies or other situations. So it's a really important work for us to keep an eye on.
Good, thank you. Right, okay, we'll move on from that one, thank you. Right, the last several months we've been having a mammoth CQC inspection, which is coming to its end.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I'm very pleased to report. We've been under investigation on and off now for the best part of 8 months. I'm very glad it's coming to an end, because that is an incredible amount of time to be subject to the scrutiny of an external review. But having said that, I think we've got lots of helpful intelligence emerging from the inspections. Most of the information that we're getting has reinforced our initial baseline assessments when we took over Manx Care, which is encouraging because we're on the right path. I'm particularly pleased to see that feedback from service users gives me incredible encouragement that we're on the right path, particularly in relation to individualised care. And the culture is cited as positive by and large by people who experience care within our services, which I think is a great thing to acknowledge. And the environment of care is very good, and it is. We heard that earlier today. We've got some of the most impressive healthcare facilities that I've experienced in my career here on the Isle of Man. And some services are well staffed, and that's working really well. And where that works really well, people get great care. And I'm very pleased with that. The areas that have been identified for improvement are in relation to the storage of medicines, the arrangements for that, access to records that people might need, particularly managers might need to deal with their staffing issues. Health and safety has cropped up as an issue in a number of areas, and I think we recognise this. It's largely in relation to the management of substances hazardous to health, and water safety management in some of our premises, particularly where we use water infrequently. The oversight of quality has been identified as an area for improvement, and we understood this because we're just building those systems now and getting them fit for purpose. So the CQC inspection has coincided with that improvement endeavour that we've got. But I think the CQC have recognised the progress we've made has been quite exceptional. Risk management is cited as a concern, but I'm confident that within the next 6 months, this board will be much better placed to understand the material risks the delivery of healthcare, given the tremendous amount of work that's taking place at the moment, which is great. Safeguarding has been cited as an area for learning and development, and we understand that, as Michelle has already explained to the board. We're absolutely cited on that, and we've got an enormous project to do on safeguarding, mandatory training, etc. So by and large, I think this has been positive overall. We've still got some bits to go, Chairman. There's probably another 4 or 5 weeks of inspection and report writing to go. But if I can say to the board that we've already started the work to develop the improvement plans for the next 12 to 24 months in response to the issues the CQC have identified. I look forward to being able to give the board assurance on those in due course.
Well, just in terms of timing, what happens next? Do we have a rough timetable for getting the final report?
So I hope and expect that certainly before Christmas we'll have an indication of the final conclusions of the inspection at Nobles and also the well-led inspection. I hope as well, with a bit of luck, we might have an indication of the mopping up bits that the CQC need to do in mental health and 1 or 2 other areas. And perhaps going into the next January, February, March, there may be an opportunity to have a synthesis of all the stuff the CQC have found to enable the board to take a view of the system. So probably a few more months yet of information trickling in, but I've already started the project to develop the improvement plans.
And then I think the sequence will be that the final report will go to the HSC. They will probably submit it to the Council of Ministers. What I guess the best thing asking about is going public with it. We do intend to go public, don't we? But
we certainly would welcome it being published, and I think that's definitely the DHSC's intention, is to publish all the reports, Chairman, as and when they come in. So we've certainly made that commitment to the public.
Good. Any questions for Paul? Looks like not. So thank you for that. Anne, over to you, Workforce and Culture.
So firstly, my apologies, there was a paper included in the pack, but it was late, so I'm not sure if everybody's had a chance to read it. So I'll touch on that. This is the response to the Culture of Care Barometer survey. And an action plan has been produced. So some progress has been made, particularly around improving communication and information sharing. There has been some slippage due to reallocation of priorities and reallocation of responsibilities to somebody more appropriate. And there's some areas where I'd just like to clarify. I'm sorry, it's not complete information because I haven't had a recent update. So some of it I think needs to be clarified, whether it's in progress, to give the board that reassurance that it's on schedule or not, because from the information I have at the moment, I'd love to touch on the rest of the work that the other work that the Workforce and Culture team are doing. They're currently doing some work in the emergency department. But they get good engagement from the team so far, and they hope to feed back the themes to the emergency care board in November. They're working with teams on care values to embed those. The staff suggestion scheme was launched in August, and just the initial meeting of the EDI forum was held in October. And just to reassure Paul, that group is cited on diversity and inclusion in all its aspects. So, and they're working currently on an action plan in relation to EDI.
Just on the agenda, it says update on pay. Is there anything to report on that?
So, for both medical and dental and Manx pay terms and conditions, we've got 4% that has been rejected, so we're still in negotiations. I think it's probably widely known that the civil service have offered 6%, and we're looking to offer something in that region, but the details of that we need to confirm to the staff side, and they're awaiting a formal offer from management at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Sri, did you want to comment on the BMA Culture of Care Barometer and progress that we're making there?
So, just so that we kind of go back at when this work started from, we said that the culture barometer, we're going to have at least quarterly surveys, and then we'll come back to the board as it was. And this has to be aligned to the NHS staff survey that we were going to do as well, which we haven't commenced as yet. So I think that would be the next step. So this won't be until the financial year of 22-23 that we will be able to start off that culture parameter survey.
23-24, no.
Sorry, 23-24, no, apologies, yes. But having said that, it wouldn't mean that it would stop. Like you could see a lot of the actions on the BMA culture survey would actually represent quite a lot of the culture parameter work going on as well. But I didn't want to kind of say that it hasn't started. So if it hasn't started, I can't really say that it's there.
Teresa.
I think it's just to give some assurance to the board that I meet with members of the local negotiating committee on a monthly basis to review progress of this. I think we have to consider this to be sort of quite an iterative document that is updated. Things might be added to it as they emerge, but that sort of commitment to repeat the cultural survey and to effectively chart the level of progress we've made from this. All of the board papers now that are shared in public now have wide dissemination across the organisation, and they do go to every single consultant who's part of medical staffing committee. So I think one of the key things that we have to keep assuring ourselves of is that our communication flows are happening and information from the board is cascading down through the correct route. So we've sort of looked at the scheduling of meetings. Executive Management Committee, which is the operational most senior meeting, happens on a Friday immediately after the board, so we can cascade that information. And there is dissemination of all the board papers. The one thing that I think is incredibly important is important from a quality and safety committee perspective, but also from a communications perspective. And we know CQC have raised this as well, is that we need that good quality intranet site. It's so important for our staff to be able to find where our policies and procedures are, to get information through that. And I did sit down with our head of communications who's leading that piece of work yesterday, and it's looking amazing, and I think we will be able to launch it very soon. But it is at the front end of it, and the information behind it is really, really high quality. And it would be great, again, another key milestone for Manx Care to have a very effective intranet site and website by the start of next year.
Good. Progress, thank you. Andy.
So part of that, obviously, as you say, it's policies and procedures and so on hanging behind that, but isn't that subject to a much longer tail, because isn't that something which is relatively early in the process at the moment? Have we made lots of progress on updating all the policy documents and getting all of those in?
It's a work in progress, Andy, if I can say. I mean, it is pretty complicated because not only do we have our own Manx Care policies and procedures, but we are also reliant on the policies and procedures of the shared services too. So it's not as simple as I would like it to be, but I'm definitely going to try and simplify it in terms of access to those documents for our colleagues. I want it to be, really easy for them to do.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on again. So we've now got the September management accounts, which our favourite accountant is going to present.
Yes, I'll do my very best. Director of Finance impression. So, we talked about this when we discussed the BAF, but you will see we are reporting an improved position as the September management accounts, and that our year-to-date forecast is now predicting a 6.2 overspend, which is a reduction from last month. However, what we do know is there is a back to balance plan which has been approved, and that is reflecting that there is some additional funding coming in from Treasury to support the pay awards. There is also applications in with the DHSC to draw down on their reserved funding, totalling 3.4 million, and there is additional CIP schemes which are being developed, which will give us that totality of back to balance, and important that we have the oversight on delivery of that. Just picking up on the CIP programme, we obviously have a target of 4.3 million as part of the mandate requirement, our basic requirement. As of September, we have delivered on £2.6 million of that 4.3, with a further 700 K's worth of efficiency savings. The page 151 just details, I guess, the number of schemes that we are working on. Most of them are cash releasing because that's what we need to achieve, and that work is progressing with the support of NIAA. Some targeted support is going into some of those areas which have struggled with the level of management capacity and time being able to be given to this, and subject matter experts, so pharmacy being one of those examples, and MIA supporting with us that. The report does also reflect that there are a number of CIP initiatives which do require a policy steer and policy agreement from the Department of Health and Social Care, and there are some risks attached to not progressing that. So these are primarily around procedures of limited clinical value, low clinical value prescribing, prescription charges, patient transport, and they represent around 600k's worth of savings into the entire programme. We will be discussing those with the DHSC when we meet at our next mandate assurance meeting next week. And as the pseudo Director of Finance and my colleague Sam will answer any questions that you may have on the finance report.
So I've got one pretty basic finance report, which is why are we still projecting an overspend?
So I think that's because we haven't got the confirmation from the DHSC that we can attribute those schemes. So I think if they were approved, we would again drop down our forecast position by about £3.4 billion. And obviously we have reflected the additional Treasury funding which is confirmed in that financial position. And I think as we get the traction on the schemes through CIP, we will see that starting to reflect. And I'm probably asked Sam to supplement anything I've just said, or correct me if I was wrong.
No, I think we have put in some papers to the DHSC for approval, but we haven't had anything formally approved yet. So on that basis, we can't take it out of the forecast. And again, with the SIP, there's still some work streams, so we just want to just see that the savings are going to come through before we build them into the forecast.
Okay, but in relation to the SIP, and I asked this question way back when we were doing the board assurance framework, you said that underlying the SIP forecast is 60 or 80 schemes with a confidence level prediction for each one, which is predicting that the CIP target will be achieved. So if we're predicting it will be achieved, why aren't we predicting that in these results?
Yeah, I think it's something we can certainly look at for next month's accounts, just to have that assurance around it.
And similarly, I think you're right that we haven't got approval from DHSC, but we have strong indications that DHSC are expecting that bid, are progressing it, and are expected to support it. So I'm not asking you to rewrite the September accounts, but when you get the October accounts, I think it would be good if we could actually make that last leap. Chairman of Finance?
Absolutely. I mean, look, in layman's terms, Andrew, we are managing for the worst, clearly hoping for the best. And, that's the issue. But we don't want to count our chickens before they're actually roosted when we then come home.
Typical account.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do you expect?
Right. Okay, any other questions on the accounts? Nope. So, I asked at the start if anybody had any other business. They didn't. So, questions from the public. Mr. Mann has submitted some questions in writing in advance, which will be given the answers to, including two that came yesterday, which I think were principally directed to Oliver. Do you want to just respond to those?
Yep, sure. So the Primary Care Network has membership of all of the GP practices. Castletown is an associate member. All of the other GMS GP practices are full members. And it also has representation from the board from the GP subcommittee of the Isle of Man Medical Society and MOLS, the local representative organisation. The PCN is so GP practices are resourced by Manx Care to participate in the primary care network and engage with that and engage with transformation. with contracts they hold with Manx Care.
When you're talking about primary care, are we talking about Isle of Man Primary Care Network LLC?
Yes, so the Primary Care Network is incorporated as
So what you're confirming there is that all the GPs on the island are all effectively members of that company?
Well, no. So in terms of the owners, it's all the GP practices, all the GMS GP practices except Castletown. Castletown is an associate. So they're not an owner.
And in turn then, that company is contracting with Manx Care?
So the GP practices are contracted with Manx Care to form a PCN to enable them to work at scale. And the PCN is the vehicle by which working at scale happens.
So doesn't that surely override the individual contracts between GPs and Manx Care?
No.
So what kind of contract is this then? What is it actually providing?
It is providing resource for GPs and GP surgeries to engage with one another so that they may work at scale to provide and arrange for services, primary care services of the residents of the Isle of Man.
So is that a tack on to the wage that doctors individually receive in their individual contracts with Manx Care?
I mean, GPs don't receive a wage; they're paid through a GMS contract.
Yes.
But yes, essentially, it's a tack on, like, if you like, it's an addition.
Yes. So what value, what overall value is Manx Care putting into that private company then?
I don't have that number to hand in front of me. I mean,
is it millions of pounds? Or hundreds of thousands?
I don't have that number in front of me. It's not millions.
It doesn't. The Manx Care Act doesn't envisage our GP services being run through a private, an overarching company that's got every GP on the island.
GP services have always been run by private independent contractors.
Yes.
GPs surgeries, GP partnerships have in the past in England and in the UK and in the Isle of Man have historically merged. That has happened before.
Yes, but not every GP surgery. If you went to the UK, not every GP surgery is all in one private company that's then contracting with the government. That's not in the Manx Care Act, is it?
So primary care networks do exist in England, and each primary care network, it's not uncommon for them to have about 80,000 patients within them per primary care network.
It all seems highly irregular. I don't see that our government would have put that. If that was intended, it would have gone into the Manx Care Act as part of the framework. How has that company ever come into
It's not the routine way by which we procure primary care. That is through the GMS contract. This is extra work to do with transformation.
Yes, but Mr. Chairman, it's a side arrangement that the Act itself never envisaged.
Well, that's your opinion, but I don't think the Act has to anticipate every type of activity that happens.
But I'm right in saying, Dr. Ellis, that this company came into being 2 years ago, just before the preparations were in place for Manx Care coming into being in shadow form. So it was very intentional that it would be put into place as part of the Manx Care operation.
So it was envisaged initially by the GPs themselves as a way of sharing best practice and seeing how clinical protocols and things could be aligned to deliver services better. It was a lucky accident, I think, that it came along at the same time as the Sir Jonathan Michael report, which recommended working at scale, and it has come into its own while Manx Care has been getting off the ground. And it has been the vehicle by which Manx Care has engaged with the GPs to enable them to work together at scale.
So at the next meeting, Mr. Chairman, will we be able to see the figure the amount of public money that's being paid to that company, in addition to the GP salaries. I think it's an important amount of public money, and we need to see, the public need to know, and I think the government need to know how much money is being paid to that private company by Manx Care.
We will take a view on whether that information does need to be in the public arena or not. I don't think it's anything like as big as you think it is. It's a relatively small amount of money, but we'll take a view on that before the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well in that case I declare the meeting closed half an hour early. I don't know if we can bring the lunch back, so we'll certainly try to.